Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Rachel. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Yes.
Nope. Okay, can you all see that? Okay, let me just move things around here a little bit. Well, thanks so much, Rachel, for your introduction and the invitation to speak today in the STEM Ed Speaker Series. It's an honor anytime I get the chance to speak and collaborate with STEM education folks. So I look forward to hearing from some of you today as we get into the topic at hand. I've prepared a conversation with you this lunch hour that represents a central theme in my research and teaching program thus far in my career. Mathematics, similar to other STEM content areas, is thought of by many as a neutral topic. Today, we're going to unsettle this notion by visiting several concepts among mathematics and mathematics education to indicate just how complicated, contested, and varied a space our discipline is. I have our Kutztown University bear logo here on the title slide here. I chose this one among the options because our KU bear is ready to attack math's neutrality myth. This bear, they recognize the harm such a neutrality myth can cause. For example, by perpetuating inequities in our teaching of mathematics and in giving mathematical knowledge a pass when its use has been responsible for some of human history's greatest tragedies. So our goal for today, thus, is to think of the assumption that mathematics is objective, value-free, and neutral, and also how mathematics education may or may not be OVN, objective, value-free, and neutral. I assert this as a Foucauldian regime of truth, something that most people sort of assume true. Sure, 2 + 2 = 4. I either got the right or wrong answer in math class. Math is black and white. We will start with the participatory moment in our time together using a Mentimeter that I set up to gather some of our thinking on this concept. Then I will move through several considerations of a variety of topics. These will be simple introductions to the philosophy of mathematics, the history and anthropology of mathematics, and debates in how we teach it. I will also relate mathematics education to several facets of human diversity, including race and ethnicity, gender, social class, sexuality, ability, and language. So I'm going to start with a warm-up to get everyone's minds on the central question we have. So I have a QR code here, which may work. I'm also going to copy this over into the chat. So I'm going to bounce out of this presentation and copy this over so we can get it into the chat. The question is, why do people say mathematics and math education are objective, value-free, and neutral? Why do we say that? Let's get our minds thinking about that together. So you might want to talk with somebody if you're in the same room as them, or just text with somebody, kind of like a think, pair, share is what I'm thinking, but or just go right ahead and put your thoughts into this Mentimeter and we'll see what people say. Hopefully you're able to now be able to put things in. I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to do that. These are very, very cool responses. They're resonating with things that we'll be looking at together as I move through some more of what I have prepared. So I'm going to keep that up for another second. And we can revisit it too. If you have more thoughts for this one, you might be able to continue adding those as we go. But thanks for sharing these ideas. We're going to move into some of the introductions of the topics I mentioned on the earlier slide. And so as you listen, I want you to think about examples that convince you further that mathematics is not black and white. It's not OVN, objective, value free, and neutral. You might want to jot some of these down, at least one or two that you are particularly convinced by, because we'll have another participatory, a Mentimeter activity after I move through some of these examples. So let me get back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so we'll start with the philosophy of mathematics. This is a heavily debated field with no consensus amongst its scholars. This fact alone demonstrates why mathematics is not objective, value-free, and neutral. I'm going to oversimplify this complicated field of philosophy of mathematics for introductory purposes. There are branches of this philosophy that ascribe to a Platonic view. So remember Plato and his ideals. So in this perspective, mathematics is the perfect mystery of the universe, its rule and order of things. And many philosophers holding this view are positioned via a religious motivation, as mathematicians set out to reveal, something like God's master plan. On the contrary, a humanistic view portrays all of mathematical knowledge as the product of human interaction and development. For example, one branch of philosophy of mathematics called fallibilism centers on the idea that everything agreed upon by the mathematical community is true simply because we haven't proven it false yet. So in this humanistic view, mathematics is a socially constructed discipline over the course of human history. The anthropologies and histories of mathematics reveals its significant diversity in both practice and people. By diversity of practice, I suggest that mathematics can be seen as a host of different things that people do. Of course, we have research mathematicians who like to branch off into subdisciplines like pure theoretical mathematics, applied mathematics, and statisticians. Beyond this, the broader public often thinks of mathematics as number crunching, mental math, such as when someone might utter, "I'm bad at math." Or perhaps they think about the algebraic equations so firmly fixed in school curricula, making lines on the coordinate plane, solving for x. Ethnomathematics, or the anthropology of mathematics, reveals the mathematical behaviors beyond school and academic mathematics. We think about the complex patterns in quilt making, the highly complicated knot tying for mathematical record keeping seen in the quipu, pictured here, used by a number of cultures in South America. And in India, the kolam, highly intricate mathematical drawings made out of rice flour and chalk. Although ethnomathematics often claims the highly complicated nature to these mathematical practices using Eurocentric mathematical conventions, that is not exactly the point of ethnomathematics. We can see these as mathematical practices on their own, with those expert users as practicing a high level of mathematical thinking and doing, with a high level of sophistication because of what they produce, and not simply because Eurocentric mathematical thinkers have decided so. The kolam and the quipu are mathematical practices demonstrating the range of mathematical life throughout the world. These examples also speak to the diversity of people who do mathematics. Ethnomathematics pushes against the uniformity of the mathematical discipline that others would claim is linear and grounded firmly in the history of Eurocentric people. Traditional histories of mathematics start with ancient Greece and Rome, move quickly into Descartes and Locke and Leibniz. Advanced understandings from the history of mathematics reveal a diversity of people in the development of mathematical ideas practiced across the globe. Multiple cultures, from China to Egypt to the Mayans, used the relationship of the three sides of a right triangle, the sum of the squares of the legs equals the square of the hypotenuse. So why are we so committed to calling this the Pythagorean theorem? So thus far, we have unsettled mathematics as something black and white, as something OVN, objective, value-free, and neutral, because it's not easily defined by philosophers, and because anthropology and history tell us that mathematical behavior is more inclusive of the world's people and their activities than many usually think. Another area to demonstrate this lack of neutrality are the mathematics pedagogy wars. This meme I found on Math Hombre's website references Star Wars to motivate understanding of the Common Core standard of mathematical practice focusing on precision. I found the meme appropriate for its reference to war as it relates to these Common Core standards. My first book, Math Education for America, contains thorough analysis of the mathematics pedagogy wars, with traditionalists on the one side promoting a sequential curriculum of skills development, and reformists on the other emphasizing that students should learn higher order thinking, conceptual understanding of the mathematics, and experience problem solving and reasoning processes like mathematicians do. The number of discussions and contested debates over these topics are striking to learn about, and it couldn't be possible if math was simply black and white or OVN. One simple example of these wars to look up is the academic bullying that reform mathematics education researcher Joe Bowler faced at Stanford when some traditional mathematician researcher colleagues attempted to discredit her research. I'll provide a few more examples of how these debates enter into the political realm a bit later in the talk. For now, I'm going to move to particular facets of human diversity and relate each one to mathematics education. This will further demonstrate how mathematics is not simply a black and white or OVN discipline. Mathematics education is about teaching mathematical behaviors to people. People are different from one another. Mathematical teaching needs to take into account these differences, and its failure at doing so is reflected in the differential learning outcomes revealed in student data. Inequities in public mathematics education abound. There simply cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching mathematics. This slide shows the cover of the new edition of my book, which is now available for pre-order, and the QR code takes you to the Routledge website to learn more about the book. Its first two chapters cover the material I've presented so far in this talk, the history, anthropology, philosophy, and an introduction to reform math teaching. But the primary goal for the book is the dedicated focus to human diversity in chapters 3 through 9. Chapter 3 provides definitions and the rationale motivating why diversity matters to math teaching. And chapters 4 through 9 each cover one specific facet of human diversity as it relates to math teaching. In chapters 4 through 9, I take each of these social identities in turn to explore their connections to the mathematics classroom. First, I engage the chapter's facet of human diversity. The chapters each take on race, social class, gender, sexuality, ability, and language by exploring the most advanced thinking on it that comes from social science disciplines like anthropology, sociology, and psychology. I next engage with the broader discussions of this facet with public education generally before moving to the specific research and practitioner knowledge about how it relates to the mathematics classroom. In each chapter, I end with discussion prompts, classroom tips for our teaching, and a glossary of terms to make the work ahead more tangible. Working from materials I wrote in the book, I'll now provide an introduction to each facet of human diversity as it relates to mathematics education. As you listen, continue to consider the ways that mathematics education becomes complicated and therefore not objective, value-free, and neutral. White supremacy in the United States has a deep and sustaining history, early on with the enslavement of African Americans and genocide and forced removal of indigenous people throughout the land, and continuing nowadays with clear patterns in economic and sociopolitical data revealing discrimination for people of color in this country. Over centuries, we have made great progress in shifting towards civil rights and equity, drawing from the variety of groups and individuals in the civil rights movement, from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to the Black Panthers and today's Black Lives Matter movement, but there is more work to be done. As a major feature in today's society, white supremacy appears in the mathematics classroom as well. Black mathematics educators like Danny Martin assert that mathematics education, and even specifically groups like the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, are a racialized project conceived of by whites and in their interest. and one that only superficially takes efforts toward addressing racial injustice as experienced through mathematics teaching and learning. The research presents a clear pattern that BIPOC students are routinely afforded culturally irrelevant mathematics education and with very low expectations of their performance, mostly with teachers focusing on low-level skills and remediation. Strong examples of new pedagogies come from several scholars and groups like the Algebra Project set up by civil rights activist Bob Moses. As one example of a classroom tip I include in the chapter on race, I write, develop unit plans with key questions and motivations that engage student culture in sustaining ways. Use the concepts from culturally relevant sustaining pedagogies and Dr. Rich Milner's opportunity-centered teaching to ensure that your units are academically rigorous but extend students' knowledge about their own cultures and worldviews. The next facet of human diversity relevant to the math classroom is social class, and I've signified this with an image of celebrated education researcher and a professor I was privileged to take in my doctoral program, Dr. Jean Anyon, pictured here when she attended the Occupy Wall Street movement in New York City. How does today's socioeconomic order affect education? Should mathematics education allow for social mobility or reproduce class structure? Are students with different social class backgrounds afforded the same or different mathematics education? These questions reveal that traditionally, mathematics teaching does not promote social mobility as much as we think, because most of the time, public education reproduces the social classes. This means that students from a working class background, for example, will likely be prepared and end up in working class jobs and income levels as adults. Mathematics teaching plays a role in this unfortunate reality, and as mathematics teachers, we can interrupt the pattern with equitable practices in our classrooms. As one classroom tip, interrupt social class reproduction by requiring all students to think critically and reason with mathematics. Avoid the tendency that we see in the research. Students from lower class backgrounds are only offered procedural mathematics. Why do girls outperform boys in mathematics in the earlier grades, but as adults, boys are more likely to end up in mathematically intensive careers? How do mathematics teachers perceive students who are successful and not successful in these classes? And why do they give differing responses when discussing boys versus girls? Math teachers need to do better with troubling gender. We can affirm that these categories are social constructions rather than biologically based realities, and recognize as false the male and female binary. One clear finding from research on gender and mathematics education shows a gendered pattern when teachers discuss their successful students. Boys have innate mathematical talent, but girls work hard. Does this sound familiar? As a classroom tip, reflect on your students' gender identities carefully, thinking about how you perceive their abilities and checking your own subconscious habits of mind that might reinforce gender norms. For example, have you caught yourself thinking that a female student is strong because she practices math, but that a male student is very smart, but just needs to work harder? And moving to sexuality. Sexuality and gender expression, including trans and non-binary identities, deserve much attention in our classrooms, even though this is an under-researched area in the mathematics education community. Queer students feel excluded in the mathematics classroom and often perceive their teachers as homophobic. The curriculum we teach generally reinforces both heteronormativity and homophobia. For classroom tips, math teachers can start with representative curriculum inclusive of LGBTQIA+ people, but move deeper into queering the curriculum with LGBTQIA+ themes, such as suggested by researcher Kai Rands and some others newly writing on this topic. Dominant discourses and practices for linguistic diversity in education and mathematics classrooms label some students as ESL, English as a second language, what many consider to be a label fraught with a deficit mindset. Math teachers need to reframe our thinking about this student group by thinking not that those in it don't have English, but instead that they do have two language practices, even when their English is early in development. Many working in this area thus refer to the student group as emergent bilinguals because it reminds us that another language proficiency beyond English is a good thing, an asset to our classroom and to our society. Math teachers need to prioritize a trans-languaging classroom space for their emergent bilingual students, one that allows students to engage in their full linguistic repertoire as they learn mathematics. As one classroom tip I suggest, group emergent bilinguals who speak the same home languages together and allow them to speak often as they work together, clarifying meaning for the content and advancing understanding together. It is okay if you do not understand their home language much or at all, but you should engage with gesturing and other nonverbal cues, as well as reinforce the content by conveying meaning through English and these cues to your students. Much attention has been paid to mathematics students with disabilities, and the particular efforts and approaches have changed over time. Since the 1970s, special education laws have prioritized efforts like response to intervention, a key development that greatly increased opportunities for special education students to learn mathematics. However, advanced thinking on this facet of human diversity includes critical disability studies and discrit, focusing on the ways segregation of students with disabilities has limited opportunities given the societal impressions that disabled students are less than or inferior to quote unquote abled students. For example, research demonstrates that disabled students are often not provided opportunities to engage in higher order thinking in mathematics classrooms. Mathematics teachers who confront such ableism directly in their classroom will think carefully about their efforts to differentiate such opportunities across the ability spectrum. Here are two classroom tips. Address ableist language in your classroom community by eliminating it in your speaking and educating your students about ableism and how it comes through in the words we use. And avoid teaching students with disabilities only procedural mathematics. Make sure that reasoning, problem solving, mathematical modeling, and thinking and doing mathematics in other ways are made highly accessible for your students with disabilities. So the previous slides provided considerations on human diversity to demonstrate how mathematics education is not black and white. It's not OVN, objective, value free, and neutral. A word of caution on, as we were consuming through those slides is, we need to consider the concept of intersectionality, that, reviewing each facet of human diversity singularly on its own is not to suggest that these intersect and layer upon to demonstrate patterns in the data and also particular experiences for individuals. Moving on, as promised, I want to return to some examples of contentious political events to further convince you of this idea that math and math education are not OVN. The politics of math education is real. The images represent two recent events that both occurred in fall 2019. The first event, represented by the upper right corner image, centers on a man named Blaine Dillard. He is a father of 3 children who attend Wake County schools in North Carolina. Wake County includes Raleigh and is a populous area of the Carolinas and with considerable industry and a good amount of the professional class. Mr. Dillard works in an IT-related position, and from my understanding, here's what happened. The Wake County School District adopted a new mathematics curriculum titled Mathematics Vision Project, MVP, and Mr. Dillard initiated a parent group that opposed the school's use of the curriculum. In September 2019, MVP, the textbook company based in Utah, sued Mr. Dillard with claims that the suit, sued Mr. Dillard with claims that he made false and defamatory statements that harmed their business. Mr. Dillard countersued with claims that the suit violated his First Amendment rights. Both suits were dropped later in the fall, but the event garnered national attention and suggests a host of questions. Who do you think was in the wrong? Upon hearing the story, do you side with the father or with the textbook company? Here we have a highly public event surrounding mathematics curriculum, and it engaged the media and the judicial system. It resulted in cries of defamation on the one side and limiting a most fundamental basic human right on the other. The event relates to several central questions in math teaching. What mathematical content should be prioritized in public schools? What pedagogy or method of teaching should be utilized by teachers? Who should learn mathematics in public schools and for what reason? And who gets to decide the answers to any of these questions? Parents, a textbook company, somebody else? The image you see in the upper left corner is accompanied also by the text in the bottom half of the slide. They represent the second event in the politics of mathematics education from fall 2019, when Seattle Public Schools announced their newly drafted K-12 Math Ethnic Studies framework. The curriculum began in response to a resolution from the Seattle King County's NAACP that integrated ethnic studies throughout all curriculum. Written by teachers and school district leadership, the math curriculum includes, for example, looking at the global history of mathematics and specifically by tracing developments by mathematicians of color over time and integrating mathematical classroom work with social studies topics like justice. Reactions to Seattle's new mathematics curriculum were swift and varied, mostly by pundits across a variety of news media. Critics labeled the project as an outcry that mathematics is racist. Supporters declared the new vision as bold responses to addressing the differences in standardized test scores among white students and BIPOC students. Some of the public followed suit with stances for and against, displaying these on social media. This example also engages the same questions that I repeat here again. What mathematical content should be prioritized in public schools? What pedagogy or method of teaching should be utilized by teachers? Who should learn mathematics in public schools and for what reason? Who gets to decide the answers to any of these questions? Parents, a textbook company, teachers, school leaders, someone else? How about the students? You may stand on one or the other side of some of these debates and issues, but with these kind of events making such a splash in the news, it becomes clear that mathematics is not black and white. It's not objective, value-free, and neutral. So I'm closing our discussion with another participatory activity using mathematical proof as a metaphor. Pure mathematicians will state a mathematical claim and then attempt to prove it true using inductive or deductive reasoning. Or if it's false, they can prove this with a counterexample. So let's work with the claim that mathematics and mathematics education is objective, value-free, and neutral. Can you prove this true with inductive or deductive reasoning? Or can you disprove it using a counterexample? My presentation today has provided you with several counterexamples that I think are true and that you might find convincing. So perhaps choose one of these and how it is sitting with you now. I'm going to advance the Mentimeter to the next slide so that then we can see what y'all are thinking about. So after we spend a few minutes with this, then I guess we'll move into questions. Okay, I think it's set up now. Is the Mentimeter working? I'm going to put the link in the chat again. Okay, it looks like it's working. Great. Thank you for these responses so far. I'm just going to comment on a couple while we're seeing them come in. I am struck by the first one. It's a very clear assertion, which is true, right? To me, and my perspective, that how can anything really be value free? We used to have those conversations, thinking about, is there ever a theoryless fact, right? Is there ever a fact that doesn't have a theory behind it? So like, for example, a date that something happened in history might not really have a theory behind it, but the fact that somebody is reporting out that date and has some kind of meaning or significance has a theoretical grounding for why that's being uttered. So I would agree with that. I think the example of how people use, manipulate the numbers to say certain things, right? The book, How to Lie with Statistics, comes to mind. So clearly there's a lot of, theory or value behind decisions that people make when they are working with statistics. And I like the two other responses to me connect over the issues of diversity in who does mathematics and how we teach mathematics. So those are nice to see. Good. So maybe when we move into the Q&A, we can hear a bit more from some of you who've shared this and kind of what you're thinking, because I know that you're just limited to a little bit of space on this in this format. We can come back to the Mentimeter maybe during the Q&A part, but I think I'm ready to sort of hand that part off and just say, we're here for questions now, I guess. So thank you very much, everybody, for engaging with this concept, and I look forward to talking about it with you now.
All right. Well, I just want to, I guess, open the doors to the questions by just, I guess, asking mine. And so we've done a lot of research and a lot of work on this task of this OBN in mathematics. And I like to just try to keep a bit of positivity in the world. So where do we think, or what do you think we've done right so far in untangling this weave of culture, values, power, and all this as intersects with math and basically education?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like the my politics slide towards the end of the presentation, I'm very encouraged by things like are happening in Seattle. But, that was a very public moment that, got onto Fox News and all sorts of things. But I see, and maybe you see as well, and we can share out like examples in the sort of local level that, occur. I work with a lot of math teachers throughout my area. I supervise a lot of student teachers, and so I'm out in the field. And I've just noticed a shift in folks like willingness to engage with issues like conversations about diversity. And it could be, the broader context and the historical moment right now in this country of really grappling with, for example, white supremacy. But this idea of math as a neutral space, I feel like when I was coming up as a math teacher, just most of my colleagues would say, why are we talking about diversity? And I don't really feel that like I used to. So, I mean, it's something to celebrate. And I'm curious if y'all are noticing that too in your spaces and in your work. But I'm seeing a bit of a shift among STEM and math teachers lately.
Well, I can't speak for math, and I can't really speak for everyone else too, but I know in STEM, I am seeing, or in science, I am seeing an uptick in us being more willing to incorporate culture and science, especially as a biologist. It's always been a pretty easy place, both in a problematic sense and in a non-problematic sense, to incorporate people, culture. I mean, we have issues like Rosalind Franklin, Henrietta Lacks, where it's easy to show, or the Tuskegee experiments, to show why we need ethics, morality, and culture, and why we do have to have those conversations about the dynamics of power in science. So that's always, to me, been a very easy, not quite a cop out, but just if you're trying to tiptoe into enculturation in science, biology is always an easy place to go, because it's, I won't say overly humanistic, because that's probably my own personal bias, but it, being sales and all, feels as if it has a humanistic aura to it. So
yeah, you're sort of speaking about the curriculum, and so this science is more suited to that. I think one of the challenges with math, I know your question was about like what are some recent successes, and I think there are some local recent successes in people thinking differently about curriculum, and also like the Seattle example. But if we were to have a math curriculum trajectory that wasn't so much algebra to calculus, but a little bit more like the main goal is, data science, and that's sort of the capstone when you get to your sophomore or junior year of high school. We'd really be able to do a lot more with social issues and, kind of relating student culture into our curriculum, like you're saying, is able to be done in science. So.
And feel free to put any questions in the chat, like this one we have here. A huge issue is that when students leave the classroom, they're bombarded with information on social media, their families, and the community that can counteract what educators try to do. How do we address society as a large so that educators don't get burnt out trying to compensate from outside or for outside influences? That's a great question. I need that answer right now. Right now.
That is a really good question. Because I need the answer too. I mean, let's think about it together. I mean, we're in the election cycle right now. So in Pennsylvania, we're a very contested state right now, and there's a lot of discourse out there that's just, not true a lot of the times. I think that one thing coming to mind is, naming this problem amongst the folks that we work with, to sort of as an act of solidarity, and saying, we know that there's so much messaging out there against us, or that's conflicting and causing problems. One of the biggest challenges with the messaging is that it's so well funded, that to sort of counteract it, on our own is, it's not even been possible by advocates that have good funding, like the unions, for example. Teacher unions aren't necessarily working that hard or focusing their attention there because they have other things they need to use their resources for. But so it is a formidable issue. And I think naming it is a really important step, as you've done here in this question, and thinking about how we can name it more frequently would be with each other, and kind of saying, what we don't necessarily talk about it enough, I think.
And I think that is in reference to where my question was, to something more positive, because a lot of times, not to use the word political, but it feels like everything becomes so negative and so political so quickly that it's just, I feel like at times we just need to stop and think about the good we've done so far in these subjects, so we can stop and say, well, we've done something, let's keep trying, versus, well, I try and nothing seems to work. Because those voices are larger than the voices that are actually saying, I appreciate this, I'm growing from this. So it's a tough narrative. Let me go through the chat, make sure there's no other questions. All right.
I did get a question directed to me, so I think if it's okay. So I think that to capture the question for everyone, I think the idea at play is how do we interrupt the cycle of the way math is taught when there's teachers who would want to stick to their, the way that they were taught. And I think it's an all hands on deck kind of approach to reform math teaching, accessing spaces with professional development, with unions, with, university-based professional development and private, even, development to, teach, develop, teachers as much as we can in the methods and convince them of sort of the topics that we talked about and discussed today, and the relevance to math teaching. I think teachers love to see examples more, and so if I think right now maybe the folks who are doing more critical work in math are still, myself included, are still like theorizing a lot. And so the more and more examples that we have to share that, even include like videos, I think is an area for the community to grow and to be demonstrating what this work looks like. Thanks for the question.
Yes, I know throughout your talk, it kept just to me reminding me that maybe we should work more with those in the humanities for these type of issues, especially since that opening slide was mentioning the enculturation of math throughout other non-Eurocentric cultures. And I think especially with my upbringing, and I can only bring up how I experienced it, since my history was Eurocentric, my science was Eurocentric, it would just focusing on the humanities in general, at least one subject that does attempt to broach upon here other cultures, maybe that would actually enhance this debate some, and definitely eliminate that thought that we have value-free anything, because I never met a person in humanities that would say such a such a statement.
Yeah, I think that's very, very needed, is the interdisciplinary work. So thank you for that comment.
Right, we have a few more minutes. If anybody who wants to post any questions, again, guys, it's not very often we get one of the authors from one of our primary textbooks here, and all those reflections we have you doing, you can now finally post some of those musings and ponderings to the person who wrote the book versus my colleagues and I, and we just have to wear his hat. He's here now, he can wear his own hat. But if not, we have his contact information. We also have this lecture recorded for us to play back and review. And I hope that everyone was as inspired to open their eyes and really think about not just math, but STEM in general. Dare I say even STEAM, because I think that may be the topic we're really approaching at this point, just STEAM. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here and talk with y'all today.
I'm sorry, Mark. I had right before you leave. I'm sorry. Just one last question just popped up.
Oh, okay.
What can students do to promote these non-objective math perspectives? Oh, thank you from the student end. Okay, I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the idea of it not being up to the teachers even, right, to find all of the ideas, but you know, promoting, you're talking about K-12 students, you know, if you're prompting students to be thinking about you know, how they are reflecting on their own daily practices, and you know, let's think about what is mathematical in them, you know, that's going to trouble the notion for students that, you know, math is just something that's in the classroom, right? So, you know, what's the mathematical practice that, you know, is embodied or that we're, you know, experiencing throughout our life, not just in the classroom as one piece. But then I think also, you know, disrupting the objectivity of math is a very common thing that can happen in the classroom with, you know, teachers' intentions to set up, you know, that the right or wrong answer isn't really the goal. It's about, you know, how do you provide some reasoning and how do you describe a mathematical concept, and all of that then becomes much more fluid. It's not like this sort of black and white, right or wrong answer kind of thing. And getting students to see that, I think, will help to develop their you know, their math identities. Math education folks do a lot of identity work, and a lot of times this objectivity about it and that assumption that students and, you know, society has about mathematics really is an obstacle for people to develop a math identity, because they don't see, you know, they're like, oh, I prefer social studies or English where we get to argue. And I'm like, math, you know, math is all about argumentation, you know. You get to reason and think and all of that stuff. I will say that math culture has a society, like a cultural element of elitism when you do your arguing, and that is a problem that would, you know, cause somebody to have you know, a tough time in developing their math identity if they feel like they're being shut down, you know, in that hierarchical system. So that's an element of math culture that I think needs to shift if we're really thinking about everyone having a positive relationship with math.
Good answer. All right. Okay, well, I think this time I don't see any other questions. So again, Mark, thank you for coming out and giving us this uplifting conversation in some places, and if nothing else, thought-provoking to remind me of the work that we still need to do. And with that, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their weekend. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either us and we'll forward them to them, or to them directly. Either way, your questions will be answered if they come to you as you think about them.
Thanks so much. Appreciate being here. Have a great day, everybody.